Okay. Be'ez Hashem, today's daf is daf Chaf Tes, and we're going to be holding daf Chaf Ches Amid Beis. We're finishing up the parak, the second parak, and start the third parak, Be'ez Hashem, of Masechta Kesubos. So just to close off some loose ends over here, we're discussing over here that there are certain type of testimony that we believe a gadol is believed to say what he saw as a young child. Okay, that's the testimony he's giving as a young child. And since these dinim are only they only relate to dinim derabbanan regarding rabbanan laws, so therefore he's believed. So Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Neman hatinik loymar, a child is permitted to say, Kach amali abba, this is what my father said. Mishpacha zu tahira, mishpacha zu tmeya. This family is tahar, and this family is tameh. They have two families. You don't know which one has a psul in them. They know a psul married in there, like a nosin or a mamzir or something like that. Somebody that you're not supposed to marry. One of the family members of this family or that family married somebody you're not supposed to. So the tinuk, the young child, is permitted to decide which family it was. Tahira utmeya salkadaitich. Is there such an expression that you call a family pure or tameh? That doesn't make sense. Ela mishpachazu keshera. You say this family is kosher, and mishpachazu pesula, and this family is pasal. There's a pasal in there. And then a child, an adult, is allowed to say edus about something else. When so-and-so, this couple got married, we were eating fruit by that wedding. What does that mean? We were eating fruit by the ktsatsa is another word for fruit. So we're going to see something fascinating by that. Anyway, then he's allowed to say, a child is allowed to say about somebody else, we used to send challah, which is truma-like, and gifts to this so-and-so the kohen. So that is an indication that that person could be considered a kohen based on the testimony of a child. He has to say that I myself brought these gifts to the kohen, and not that I sent it through somebody else. So I personally delivered truma to this kohen. Now the Brisa says, V'kula, in all these cases, let's say, can a goy who became a ger say over testimony of something he saw when he was a goy? If he was a goy when he saw the event, and then he became a ger, or eved, he was a slave, and he became a free Jew, ein amonim, they're not believed. So even though they were an adult guy, but we don't trust them when they become a ger to say over what they saw when they were a goy. The ein naman loima, and again we saw this yesterday in the Mishnah. A child is not believed to say there was an easement for this so and so in this place. He had a right to make a hesped in this, to make a eulogy on somebody else's property. That we don't say. Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika says he is believed. So the Gemara doesn't understand. Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika ahaya. Which case did Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika say that the child is believed? Ilema aseifa. Would you say on the end of the brisa that a child is believed to say that somebody's property has an easement on there? So you're trying to cause the guy to release money. In other words, you're saying that your property is not fully yours. Part of the property belongs to somebody else. And you're basing it on the testimony of an adult saying over a testimony of something he saw as a child. How could Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika say that in that case we would believe the man? Ella Aresha. Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika was specifically talking about the beginning. What does the beginning of the brisa say? Which we learned. We said over that if it was a goy that became a ger, he cannot say over edus what he saw when he was a goy, right? Because we don't trust him to say over edus when he saw when he was a goy. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Reika Rabbi Yochanan ben Reika says we would trust him. If he became a ger and he says over an edus that he saw when he was a guy, we would trust him. But Michael Mipalki, what are they arguing about? Tanakama Savar, the Tanakama holds Kavan, the guy who, since he's a Gentile, loy have a dayak. He wasn't so, he didn't have the Jewish spirit in him at that time, and therefore he wasn't precise and detailed in his observation. Rabbi Yochanan ben Reika Savar, Rabbi Yochanan ben Reika holds Kavan, since as a guy, the daite le'igure, his intention was to become a ger. So medik have daik. He is paying attention to details, even though he's not yet a Jew. So that is the machlekes between Rabbi Yochanan ben Reika, whether you believe the ger to say over edus when he was, or about something he saw when he was a guy. Now he said the Gmai Kutzatza. What was the case that the guy is saying over edus that I attended so-and-so's wedding and so-and-so's wedding, and they distributed fruits by the wedding. The Tanur Rabbanan, we learned in a brisa, Keitzad Kitzatza. What is called Kitzatza? Echad min ha'achad. Let's say you have a family. This is fascinating. One of the brothers, Shenasa Isha She'ena Hagenes, that married a woman that was not appropriate for him. For example, you have a guy in the family that married a mamzeres. So, the Kedushin works, but it's not a good marriage. So what if the rest of the family is so embarrassed of this marriage? The family comes to the wedding, and they bring a barrel full of fruits, and they break it in the middle of the street. And they say, so to speak, Achenu Beis Yisrael, our brothers, Shimul, pay attention. Yes, Achinu Pleini Nasa Ishib Sheinen Hagenes. Our brother married somebody not appropriate for him. That we're afraid that his children are going to be mixed up with our children. So we want to put a separation, that we're sort of like kutzatza, cutting him out of the family. He went off on his own and married somebody not appropriate. So we give out kutzatza, things that are fruits, which are cut off from trees, in order to indicate we want to cut him off from our family. So don't confuse him with us. That's what the rest of the family is saying. Take a memento for generations. Don't confuse his kids with our kids. This is the fruit, the kutzatza, that the tinnik, the child, is believed to say that he attended this wedding, and they gave out kutzatza, fruit. So he, so to speak, is saying that so-and-so married an illegal marriage and at that time. And we would trust him to say over that edus what he saw as when he was a child. Hadron Allah Isha since Armala. Okay, now we go to the next parak. I remind myself, my father was like one of the younger children who survived the war. So after the war, there was a lot of marriages, and they needed children to attend the wedding. So he ended up attending a lot of marriages that were married right quickly after the war to when Klal Yisrael was trying to rebuild. So it's interesting. He says I was at her marriage and that marriage and whatever. So this is the same thing. Learning the Gemara. Okay. The next parak is dealing with the two things in the called mefate and oines. When a man seduces, imagine this: a man seduces a 12-year-old girl. Okay, the pasuk says, let's do it quickly. V'chivati ish besula. Remember that word. A man seduces a virgin. Asher lo yarasa, she was not married. V'shachavima, and she convinced her, let's sleep together. So then the Torah says that the Torah seems to say that the ideal mitzvah is, I don't think we force it, but we should want him to pay the price and make him his wife. That means it's called the bride price, which means that give her a ksuba. Like that's how this parak enters into our sugi, because the pasuk sort of mentions the inyan of ksuba. And the Torah is saying that, I want you to marry her and give her a ksuba like a regular wife. You seduced her as a unmarried woman. Now marry her. But in Avila Sita life, she doesn't want to marry him, or her father of this 12-year-old girl doesn't want this guy to marry his daughter. So then he has to pay kesef yishkol k'moya absulos. Then he has to pay money of silver, according to silver weight, according shkolim, the kumoya absul, like the bride price for a besula. So there's no tsar, there's no other thing that you have to pay except this price. But the Torah doesn't say what the fine is. So we're going to learn that the fine is 50 shkolim. If you seduced a girl, the fine is 50 shkolim. Why do you learn that? How do you know that from? Because we'll see right now. There's another chumash in Parshas Devarim. So first, this parsuk is in Parshas Mishpatim, and then in Parshas Kiseitze, the Torah talks about a rape, another situation. Ki imtza ish nara basula. If a man finds a nara basula, now a nara basula is a girl that's 12 years old, from 12 till she's 12 and a half. So imagine a 12, that's the only time. 12 to 12 and a half year old girl who's a virgin, who's never married her, usvasa, and he seized her, and he basically raped her. Binim so, and Adim, and he was caught by Adim. So then there's a big knas. First, he has to pay 50 kasef, 50 silver shkolim to the father of the girl, and there's a punishment. There's no choice in the matter. He has to marry this girl. And this is a very heavy price, because if it's a girl that he doesn't want to remain married to her, he's going to have to pay the ksuba and to support her and treat her like a normal wife. And this is tachas ishi'ina, because he violated her. He can never have the right to divorce her. Only if she wants a divorce, I guess she can demand a divorce, but he has no right to divorce her. He's basically stuck with this girl. So now we learned this Gemara. Let's go to the beginning of the parak. Okay, Elu Naris. Okay, Daf Lamed. Elu Naris. The following girls who are 12 years old. Yesh lehem knas. There is a knas that you have to pay the 50 shkolim. Now, certainly there's a knas for a regular girl, a Jewish girl. But let's say it's a girl that you can never marry. So therefore, you would think the Torah really wants you to marry these girls that you seduced or you raped. But if the following, because you don't have permission to marry them, it's a avera to marry them. Nevertheless, the Mishnah says that you still have to pay the fine for sleeping with this girl. Elu naras, the following girls, yesh lehem knas. There's a fine if you rape or seduce them. Haboa al hamamzeres. You had what? You raped or seduced a mamzeres. Val hanesina, or a nesina, as you know, is a type of group of Jews that became gerim by tricking Yehoshua. They're a subset of the Jewish world that was around. And they had, because they tricked Yeshua, they were really from the 7 nations, but they tricked Yeshua into becoming Gerim. Therefore, they always had a outside status within the Jewish world. They married each other, but they kept the mitzvahs like a Jew. But we're not allowed to marry them. So if someone had raped a girl on Nasin, he has to pay knas. Valakusis, the Kutzians are very interesting people. Here, as you know, the 10 tribes were sent into exile by Sancheriv, and in the place, Sancheriv brought Kusim to take over the place where the 10 tribes were, and they became Gerim. They actually joined the Jewish people. And the question was, according to this Mishnah, they actually became Gerim, not because they really cared about the Jewish religion, but because they were afraid of certain lions that were attacking them, and they felt that if they become Jewish, they'll be protected from the lions. So they became Jewish, but they never really became Jewish. So almost like they're goyim. So, but still, they have a din like a Jew, and you would have to pay knas if someone had relations. Now, you can't marry them because they're not really Jews. Or haba al hagioris. Or let's say, or haba al hagioris v'alashvuya v'alashivka. Someone who raped or seduced a gioris, or a girl who was in captivity, or a maid, shniftu nishkai rishtachru, that became released from captivity, or became a Jew, or she became free, less than 3 years old. Because one of the important caveats of this fine is that the girl has to be a basula, a virgin. But a gioris, a goy, is even if she becomes a goy at 5 years old, a ger at 5 years old, she's not a virgin. We assume that all the goyim do znus. So therefore, or a girl in captivity. But if she became a ger before 3 years old, so even if someone slept with her as a guy when she was a guy, but she became a ger and her basula comes back to her. So therefore, if they became a ger or they became redeemed or they became free less than 3 years old in one day, they are considered to be basulim, and therefore there would be knas on these girls. Now the Mishnah continues, okay, those were chayvei lavim. These were cases where the girls, basically, habal mamzeres, let's say, you can't marry a mamzeres because there would be an isser lav on the Torah. You don't get misa or kares, but you would get malchus. But habal achoise, let's say somebody who's mizana with his sister, who was oinus mafata with his sister. There's only kares. There's no mises bezdin. Or your father's sister, your mother's sister, your wife's sister, or your wife's brother, or the wife of your father's brother, or valanida, or you raped a girl or mizana with a girl. Well, that was a nida. Also, yeshlem knas, there is knas. Even though there's kares there, that means if you would marry them, you would get misa. Hashem would punish you. Ein behem misa bezdin. There is no misas bezdin, and therefore the bezdin would not kill the person, and therefore so there's only knas, because if in a situation, let's say someone was mizana with his own daughter, right? So there is no knas. Why? Because technically, mizana with your own daughter is a misa bezdin, and therefore there's a concept called kamle midarabimle. Since they're going to kill you, they don't make you pay. So, but that's only if bezdin's going to actually do something to you, or by misa, even if they were almost going to do something to you, if let's say they didn't warn you. So therefore, there's no knas by wherever there's an arayas that they would kill you. Basha Ein Kain, on the other hand, someone who does nus with his sister, right, that is only kares. Therefore, Bezdin is not going to kill him. So there's no punishment by Bezdin. The court is not going to inflict punishment. So therefore, there is a fine, at least, that you would have to pay to your father for just being mizana with your sister. That's very clear. And I want to point out, by in the case they actually warned you, by the way, in the first part of the Mishnah, let's say they told the person, don't do nis with this mamzeres, and he did it. So then he's going to get malchus. If he gets malchus, if the Bezdin is going to give him malchus, the lashes, then they're not going to make him pay the fine. Our Mishnah is talking about when he was not warned. And because he was not warned, so he's not getting lashes from being mizana with the mamzeres. Therefore, he's going to get knas. Therefore, he's going to have to pay the fine. Now the Gemara begins. The Gemara says that only these girls get fines. Let's say you mizana with a kosher girl that you could potentially marry. Does the Mishnah mean to exclude that they don't get fined? Hani naras psulis islu knas ksheris loy. Does that mean that a kosher you mizana with a regular woman, you wouldn't get regular girl, you wouldn't get knas? Answer the Gemara, of course not. Hachi kamar elu naras psulish yeshlen kas. The following girls who you're apostle, that means you are not allowed to marry, despite the fact that you can't marry them, because part of the Torah really wanted you to marry these girls, but these girls, you can't marry them. Nevertheless, you still have to pay knas. Abal mamzeres, valansina, valakusis. Now, we've been saying throughout this Mishnah and through the introduction is that a knas, the fine, is only if you mazana with a girl, you raped a girl that's 12 years old till 12 and a half. That's it, 12 to 6 months. You only have a 6-month period till the Torah imposes this fine. But if it's a girl under 12, so there is no knas. So that is only the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and our Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Meir. The Gemara says like this, now in only a 12-year-old girl, there is knas. Till she's 12 and a half. Ketana lo. But someone under bas mitzvah, there is no knas. Mantana, who's the author of our Mishnah? Rav Yehuda Amarav, Rav Meir. It's Rav Meir. The Tanya we learned to the Brisa, Ketana, a girl under bas mitzvah, mibas yom echad, from till the time that she's 1 year old. Okay, an infant. from the day she's 1 year old, until she becomes 12 years old, and she brings 2 hairs, she can prove she's 12 years old by having 2 hairs under her armpit. Yesh lehem mecher. The father has a right to sell her as a slave, as a maid. That's written in the Chumash, that the father has a right to sell his daughter. The ein lo knas, but he cannot receive knas, a fine, if she is raped, right? But the girl, the daughter, that once she becomes bas mitzvah, and she proves it by showing 2 hairs under her armpit, until she's 12 and a half. Yesh lo knas, if someone rapes her, he has to pay the fine to the father. The ein lo mecha, but the father has no right to sell her, right? Divrei Rab Meir. So Rab Meir said this chumash that we just discussed is very limited to a girl who's 12 to 12 and a half. If whenever the father has a right to sell, ein knas, he can't receive the fine. But in the time when she's 12 to 12 and a half, where he could receive the fine, ein mecha, there is no sale. He can't sell her as a maid. The Chachamim disagree, and they are not the author of our Mishnah. They hold Ketana, a girl who's 3 years old, from when she's 3 years old till she becomes an adult, till she's 12 and a half, knas. She has knas, a fine. What do you mean? Knas and mechaloi? The father could only accept fines, but cannot have a right to sell her? Eiman, no, of course not. The Chumash says he has a right to sell her. We go to Amud Beis, Lamed Amud Beis, Af Knas b'Mkoy Mecha. That means even at a time where he could sell it, he also has the right to collect the fine in case she was raped. So he has 2 rights to a girl. According to Chamim, as soon as a girl turns 3, the father has a couple of things he can do with her. He could sell her, or if she's seduced or raped, he gets to keep the fine. Now the Gemara asks a question. The Gemara asks the basic question, but doesn't the Chumash say you have to marry this girl? V'hani b'nei knasaninu. Are these people you have to pay the fine? If haboal mamzeres, you mazana with, let's say, with a mamzeres, you can't marry this mamzeres, so why should there be a fine? The Torah seems to say that the fine has to do with the girl that potentially you could have married. Ba'amai ikru kav v'lo yisili isha. Doesn't the Chumash say that this girl should be your wife? If you raped her, we want her to be your wife. And therefore, Isha Haruyale has to be a wife that's appropriate for you. And if it's a wife that you cannot marry, so maybe you should be potter, you shouldn't have to pay the fine of 50 shkalim. Answers the Gemara, Omer Rav Shlokish. Rav Shlokish says, but the Chumash says nara, 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 3 hanara. Basically, it says the word nara 3 times. If you look at the pasuk over here, ki makse ish nara in the blue, and hanara, so that's 1 time. And the hanara, it's as if it says twice, because the hey is counted as 1, and nara. So this word, it could say v'noshna isha sheichiv la'avia. He has to pay to her father chamishim kasav. Why does it repeat the word nara twice? So on this, Rish Lakish says chad legufe. 1 is just to tell you what the topic of the Chumash is talking about. The parsha is talking about a girl of 12 years old. V'chad latuye chayav elavin. And Mechad Latuye Chayav Krisis. 1 extra nara that the Torah wrote is to make it inclusive that even if the girl is a Chayve Lav, you would get a prohibition if you married her, or even if the girl is somebody who would be Karis if you married her, like your sister. Still, the Torah was inclusive that even those girls, you have to pay a fine. Rapapa says, let's go back to by mefata, which is seduction. The Torah writes besula, besula, ha besula. Same idea. The Torah wrote it 3 times. Chiyuvati besula is 1, right? And now we have that the Torah says, if you're not going to marry her, then you have to pay kesef yishkol kamoyer ha besulais. So it's twice, because hey is once and besulais is extra. The Torah says kesef yishkol kamoyer, like the kesef you should give her like any girl. Why do you say ha besulais again? So it says 3 times. Chad legufe. 1 is to teach you the topic is about a besula. V'chad latuye chayve lavim. V'chad latuye chayve krisis. And 1 is to make it inclusive to a girl that you would be a chayve lavim, a prohibition to marry. And 1 is to include a girl that you would be chayve karis to marry. Even though you're not supposed to marry these girls, still you don't get away with just rape, with seducing her. You would still have to pay the fine. So the Gemara asks a question. Each one, see, Rish Lakish learned it from Mefata, and Rav Papa learned it from Mefata, and Rish Lakish learned it from Oinis. So Rav Papa, my time, Rish Lakish. Why did Rav Papa use Rish Lakish's Hanara, Nara, Nara? Because because the Nara is not extra. Because the Abaya, the Omar Abaya said, let's say he was Mazana or he raped the girl, right? And now he's supposed to pay the money, Umesa, but the girl died. Then in between, by the time when Bezdin required you to pay the knas, so you raped, she died. Potter, you're exempt from paying the fine. Shnema, the pasuk says, "V'nosan la'avi hanara." You have to give it to the father of the live child. La'avi hanara, v'loy la'avi mesa. The father of the live girl, but not the father of the dead girl. So that's why extra nara is not extra. It teaches you that the girl has to be alive during the court case when they're trying to fining the perpetrator of the rape. Rish Lakish, my time al Omakra Papa. Rish Lakish, why didn't he learn that it's talking about Chayve Lav and Chayve Krisis from the source of Rapapa of Mifata? And says the Gemara, who can be by Gzeir Shava? That teaches you Gzeir Shava, and a very important Gzeir Shava. Because how would I know that? Remember when we learned this pasuk by seduction, the Torah doesn't tell you how much you have to pay. The Torah says Yishkal. You have to give shkalim, coins, but doesn't tell you how much coins. But here, by Oinis, the Torah says chamishim, 50. So it says 50, but it doesn't say what type of coins. 50 what? $50 or 50 shkalim? So we're going to have Moya Absulais, which teaches you that you apply what's written by Oinis, which is the number 50, to Mafata, by seduction, that it is also 50. And the currency of shkalim, which is written by Mefata, you apply it by Oinis. So both get 50 shkalim. That's defined by both of them. So what was revealed by one was hidden by the other. And that's why you need an interrelationship between Mefata and Oinis. And that's what he uses the pasuk. So that's why Rapapa needs the pasuk for the following Gezer Shava. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Kesef Yishkol Kamar Absulos. By Mefata, by seduction, the Torah says it has to be shkolim, that currency. Sheizeh Kamar Absulos. That Umar Absulos Kazeh. That this one should be like Kamar Absulos. That this one has to pay the amount of 50. Like Kamaya Absulis, like the value of a bride, like the value of a virgin that is determined already by the rape, which is the number 50. Umaya Absulis, and by the rape, which we said is 50, kazeh, it should be in this currency that it's written by seduction, which is shkolim. So therefore, that's why I need. So that's why I need basulas. So according to Abaya, according to Rapapa, he needed Hanara. Rish Lakish needed Habsulas. So that's why they chose to learn things differently. So the Gemara asks, Rish Lakish nami b'bayile kadabaya, v'Rapapa nami b'bayile g'zer shava. Rish Lakish, who learned it from Nara, he probably also needs the source teaching of Abaya that the child has to be alive. And Rapapa also needs it for the g'zer shava of Kamoya Habsulas. So therefore, each one is you have a question on each one. How do they know it from? So the Gemara just combines it all together and says like this: Elashita kroiksiv. The Torah writes these words between the two of them 6 times. Nara, 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 basula, basula, ha basula. So yeah, it's six extra words. So trey legufayot. 2 are not extra. 2 tell you that we're talking about a virgin and also a girl that's 12 years old. Chad. One of the teachings of Nara teach you the halacha of lakada Abaya. What Abaya taught you, that it teaches you that the girl has to be alive during the court case before the perpetrator has to pay the fine. The Gzeir Shava. One teaches you the Gzeir Shava, that you compare Mefata to Oinis and Oinis to Mefata, that they both pay 50 shkolim. So that's 2. So now you dealt with 4 of them. It's Yasru trade. Now you have extra 2, 1 Nara and 1 Basula. Chad latu yechayve lavin. One makes it inclusive that even chayve lavin, there's an inyan of knas. Chad latu yechayve krisis. And one makes it inclusive that even chayve krisis, even if it's a girl that you would get chorus to marry, so you simply can't marry this girl, you still have to pay the fine. So that's end of the discussion of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah holds that girls, you're mazana with a 12-year-old girl, for the most part, you're going to pay knas. if it's a kosher girl, for sure. But even if there's an issa to marry her, like, for example, there's a prohibition in the Torah, or kedusha wouldn't even work. For example, it's a chayve krisis, like your sister, you still would have to pay a fine. Now the Gemara just ends off over here, and that will take us to the end, is that there are two other Tanoim who hold not so. They limit it even further. They say, Lapuke, our Mishnah is exclusive of this Tana. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa that fines only apply the loy siyala isha. The Torah says you have to take her as a wife. So what does this mean? What does this word siya mean? It means that either the Torah says that potentially it has to be someone that you can make kedushin with, right? That kedushin would take effect, even though you're doing an avera, but kedushin would take effect. You could betroth her. Or siya means you have to be type of wife that you could keep. So Shimna Timna Omer, Shimna says, you limit it, Aisha Sheyesh Ba Habaya. It's a woman that at least you can at least have some engagement with, excluding somebody that you get karas. If a karas, so according to Shimon and Timni, you would not pay knas if you mizana with your sister. But for mamzeres, you would pay knas because potentially you can marry a mamzeres, although you have, you're doing something wrong. Rab Shimon ben Menasya says, no, it's only limited to a girl. Knas is only limited to a girl. Isha haru'uya lakaima. It's a woman that you have to be able to keep as a wife. And if you mazana, let's say, with a mamzeres, true, you can make kedushin with, but you can't keep her as a wife. Therefore, according to Rab Shimon ben Menasya, there would not be any knas. So Gemara says, "My benayu." What's the difference between Shimon and Timnei and Shimon ben Menasya? Like I said, Amar Abzero, Mamzeres Nesina Ika benayu. Mamzeres Nesina or Nesina also. You can't marry. You can marry a Nesina because the Torah says loy tischaten. You're not supposed to marry this person because they're part of the 7 nations. But if you do marry, the marriage takes effect. According to the opinion that says as long as a marriage could be effectuated, there is knas. There's knas over here because a marriage could take effect over here, even though it's an avera. But according to the Man Diyama that says this has to be an appropriate wife that you could potentially keep. The following you cannot keep, and therefore these are women that you're supposed to divorce, even though you effectuated a marriage, but you have to divorce them because it's those type of women. According to Rab Shimon ben Menasya, you would not beget knas. You would not be obligating knas of those type of women, even by a mamzer. Now, the Gemara asks just one question, that if Rab Shimon ben Menasya held like Rabbi Akiva, let's say Rab Shimon ben Menasya held like Rabbi Akiva, that wherever the Torah says, don't marry this woman, the Torah says you can't effectuate even a marriage. So if Rab Shimon ben Menasya held like that, then we would be a case that would make a difference between him and Shimon HaTimni. Because according to if Rab Shimon ben Menasya held like the following opinion of Rabbi Akiva, the Amar ein kedushin toifsim b'chayav elavim, that kedushin doesn't take effect between of chayav elavim, and if Shimon ben Menasya held like Rabbi Akiva, my benayo, what would be a practical difference between Shimon ben Menasya and Shimon HaTimni? Because in all cases, when the Torah says don't marry somebody, the Torah says marriage wouldn't even take effect. So the Gemara says that even if Shimon ben Menasya held like Rabbi Akiva, that kedushin wouldn't take effect with chayav elavim, there is one chayav elav that kedushin would take effect. Ika benayu almana lekohen gadol. If a almana marries a kohen gadol, for example, an almana, and this would be an almana who never slept with anybody, right? Because if she's not a basula, then the whole story is not beginning. An almana, a girl got married, and her husband died during the engagement. Now she wants to marry the kohen gadol. The kohen gadol raped her, right? The kohen gadol raped her. So she's a basula, and the kohen gadol raped her. So kedushin, technically, even though the Torah says don't marry an almana, even according to Rabbi Akiva, the kedushin would take effect. Rab Simai, the Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Rab Simai Aima min hakoil oiser Rab Akiva mamzerim. We had this in Yavamas. Every type of illicit marriage, according to Rabbi Akiva, is a mamzer, which is a very strict opinion. That means any type of illicit marriage to a girl the marriage doesn't take effect, and the kid is a mamzer. Chutz, except even Rabbi Kiva would agree, me'almana lekohen gadol. Shari Amar Torah, the Torah says, lo yikav leichala, chilulin hu oisa vein oisa mamzerim. An almana cannot, a kohen gadol cannot marry an almana, but if they do get married, the kedushin takes effect, and the child just loses he's not a kohen, he's just like an empty kohen. He's a chalal, but he's not a mamzer. So even Rabbi Kiva will hold that a cholol to a kalmana to a kohen gadol is a good potential marriage. So therefore, that would be the difference between him and Shimon HaTimni. According to Shimon ben Yasya, although kedushin takes effect, the Torah says the Torah doesn't like this marriage. You're not supposed to stay with the almana to the kohen gadol. So there would not be knas in that case, and that would be Shimon ben Yasya's opinion. Shimon HaTimni would hold yes, but since kedushin takes effect, knas would apply. Now the Gemara says, "Ular sheva of the Amma boy v'nitzvach al Rabbi Kiva ben Yosef shayu oime kol shein lebiya b'Yisrael vlad mamzer my beneyu." According to Rabbi Sheva, Rabbi Kiva doesn't even have this leniency. He holds that even almana to kohen gadol, as long as there is no, if the Torah says don't have relations with this girl in a prohibition, that wouldn't, the kedushin doesn't take effect. Rabbi Sheva even more, takes Rabbi Kiva even to the more extreme. My benaya, what would be a case where even Rabbi Sheva, even Rabbi Sheva's opinion about Rabbi Kiva, there would be kedushin taking effect. Ika benayu, there would be the difference. We go to Lamed Aleph, Chayave Esei Mitzri V'Adomi. A Chayave Esei of Mitzri V'Adomi. The Torah says that an Egyptian or an Edomite that becomes a Georus, you're not allowed to marry them till third generation. If you do marry them, you don't get a prohibition. You just transgressed a positive commandment. So even Rabbi Yesheva would agree in Rabbi Akiva's opinion that kedushin would be effectuated in that case, and that would be a good case of a difference between Shimon ben Menasya, who holds that you have to, even if kedushin is effectuated, if you did an aveira and the Torah doesn't want you to stay with this marriage, then knas doesn't apply. And he would, but Shimon HaTimni would hold knas would apply. One more question: Ha nichel Rabbi Sheva. The way you interpret Rabbi Yesheva, that he's just going one step further than Rabbi Simai. Rabbi Simai said only almana l'kohen gadol, and Rabbi Yesheva says no, almana l'kohen gadol kedushin is not effectuated. Only an iser essay is kedushin work. But that's then you perfectly make sense. But maybe Rabbi Yesheva meant to say, in Rabbi Akiva's opinion, that means that nothing works. There is no such a thing of, if the Torah says you can't marry this girl, even if it's just a positive commandment, the Torah says positively don't take this girl, or you should wait till she's after 3 generations, then take this girl. Still, if you do it beforehand, the Vlad would be a mamzer. Any time the Torah says don't marry a girl, the Vlad is a mamzer, kedushin doesn't work. So my benayu, what would be a case where Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe would hold kedushin would work, and a case that would be where the Torah says don't keep the girl, and that would be a difference between him and Shimon HaTimni. And says the Gemara, Ika benaya be'ula l'kohen gadol, and this is the final teretz. Just as the Maishnah, the Havale essay Shena Shava B'Kol. There's one essay called a be'ula l'kohen gadol. A kohen gadol, the Torah says, is supposed to marry a virgin. Okay, so therefore, if a girl who was a be'ula, for example, she was, as a young girl, as a 12-year-old girl, she slept around, but she didn't sleep around in the normal way, because if she slept around in the normal way, she's not a basula. She slept around in the abnormal way, so she maintained her virginity, and the Torah says that's still called a be'ula. She slept around with somebody, although in the not normal way. So she's a be'ula. If she was raped by a kohen gadol, or she was seduced by a kohen gadol, so technically the kohen gadol could marry this girl. Why could the kohen gadol marry this girl? The Torah says in Isser Asay that he's supposed to marry only a virgin, but that's only an Isser Asay that only applies to a kohen gadol. It doesn't apply to every Jew. So even that Isser Asay, everybody would agree that kedushin would work, and that would be the case between Shimon ben Manasseh and Shimon Temni. Shimon ben Manasseh would hold that since the Be'ula L'Kohen Gadol, if technically he could marry her, but the Torah wouldn't want them to stay together. So then Knas would not apply in that situation. If the Kohen Gadol raped the Be'ula, this girl, the Kohen Gadol would not have to pay Knas. But according to Shimon Timni said that the point of Eloi Siya Isha means that you have to have a girl that you could potentially marry. And since this girl you could potentially marry, even though you're not supposed to stay together, but kedusha would work, you would have the idea of knas over here. But again, one thing that you learn that these are side opinions. Our Mishnah holds that even if you can never marry the girl, even though the kedusha wouldn't work by the girl, like your sister, our Mishnah says clearly there would be knas. But there's just two other opinions that are not mentioned in the Mishnah, Shimon Timni and Shimon Manasseh, who hold that they limit it. That there has to be either a girl that you could potentially make kedushin with, or a girl, according to Shimon Manasseh, it means that you could potentially live with. And if you can't live with it, according to Shimon Manasseh, there is no kenas. Okay, that is the end of today's daf. Wow.